there. My name is Ash, and I'm an herbalist and an artist. I've decided to start a little YouTube channel here. I'm not a YouTuber by any stretch of the imagination. Um, it's also been years and years since I've even been on video or taken a selfie. Um, so this is kind of foreign to me. I'm still getting comfortable with working with camera, speaking um, to kind of an audience, or what I intend to be an audience eventually. Um, so I feel like I'm kind of just talking to myself at the moment. I wanted to start this because I am starting my little herbalism business, just getting going, and I'm really excited about it. I figured this would be a good, easy way to kind of teach people a little bit more about herbs, why they're helpful to us, and promote what we're doing. I'm a writer. I write a lot, so I've also put together a little Kindle, Amazon books, working on more. But I figured the video would be kind of a easier, faster way for me to teach people, um, and kind of put a face to what we do. So my intentions today here are just kind of for this first video, to get into why we're doing this, kind of in a broad view. I have an idea for another video where I'll pretty much cover the same topics, but from a more personal standpoint, and why we specifically are doing what we do and what we intend to do in the future. So as a whole, just here to say hi, get acquainted with everybody, and just start things out. Kind of what drove us to, my husband and I, when I say us, but me specifically as well, what kind of drove me into herbalism was kind of noticing the things in our society that I have a problem with, I guess, the fixes we need to our systems, specifically more like agriculture systems, our medicinal, pharmaceutical based society, and the way that's, taken over a lot of people's lives. My experience is no different. I prescribed various medications for a number of years, and about 10 of those years I dealt with severe side effects. And the solution, it seemed to me, was that they would prescribe more pills for side effects. Sorry, my brain is thinking symptoms. Like I said, I'm no YouTuber, so you'll see me kind of stutter and stumble and lose my thought process and get it back. So I went through about 10 years of this, and it kind of culminated in these side effects that I just decided, like, why is this worth it? Like, I don't even know where my health is anymore. And I don't feel like I'm alone in that, especially just with people I've talked to, their various experiences. And so I pretty much went off all those medications, cold turkey, which I don't always recommend, depending on what you're on. But for me, it was the best choice because I just need to get back to kind of what I call ground zero. I needed to know where my health was, and what I actually needed. The other thing was kind of feeling like your health is out of your own control, and being reliant on someone else to tell you, you need this, you need that. So for me, taking back that control was a big step in taking, improving my health, like both physically and mentally. Sorry, I have notes here because I'm human and nervous on camera. So I felt like that kind of really, on top of, dealing with medications, the side effects, what I needed the medications for initially, and then seeing like news all the time that was very doomsday-ish, just kind of tore me down as a person. And it took a long time to really kind of learn how to get that back and feel like I had a voice, feel like I had a purpose, feel like I could make a difference, which all played into kind of supporting my health, because when we think of health, we usually think of the body, but your mental state and your mind has so much to do with that. So very much. And I kind of underestimated how much back in the day, and I didn't used to know anything about herbalism, medicinal, like wellness through plant medicine. And it made me feel really disconnected from the world when I didn't know those things. It's like you go take a walk out in the woods and it's like, oh, there's a beautiful flower, like the green is nice. But when you can start to put a name to, like, oh, that's usnea, or that's uva ursi, or even recognizing plants that maybe are invasive, like, oh, there's catnip here, or there's a lot of mullein, which does grow prevalently, but it's a naturalized plant, but it originally wasn't here. And when I say here, I mean I'm based in the Pacific Northwest portion of the United States, specifically like Washington and Idaho, and Montana, because I grew up there too. And when it comes to health, like, I found the more I start to familiarize myself with the world around me, the natural life, plants and animals alike, put names to them, recognize them. When I recognize them, they recognize me too, and it helped me feel connected to the world and less despairing by what society puts out, and the view of, we're killing this world, whereas when you're out in the world, you realize that, I mean, a lot of that just comes from our disconnection. We actually can live peacefully and in reciprocity with the natural world, and it's easier than some people think, and beneficial, like so beneficial. And that really turned things around for me in a lot of ways. So it's kind of the, like, why we want to do this is, to help people learn that they can too. It's not as difficult as you'd think, and recognizing plants that are helpful to your life, or maybe the reason they keep showing up in your life, is not something to be ignored. From my personal experience, like, I had to get kind of angry at the system, where it's like I had to replace that despairing feeling with, I won't say rage, but like definitely like a discontent, like an anger toward what we're told is healthy versus what we can achieve on our own. And it's amazing to me. There's so much out there, and you'll never learn it all. I'm still learning every single day. And I love that because it keeps me going, it keeps me interested, it keeps me curious and fascinated by our beautiful world we live in. And like, it all starts in your own backyard kind of thing. Like, there's so much, even like, even in kind of an urban setting, that you can see and start to recognize, and even help out, like, down to dandelions. Like, dandelion root is highly medicinal, especially for your kidneys and cleansing your system. And we treat it like a weed, which, I mean, it's invasive. Yes, it's not from here, but even invasive plants, there's so much to value about them, and to stop seeing things as a negative and seeing the benefits in them is a very personal like journey. And in a lot of ways, I mean, depending on who you are, where you're coming from, it's a very spiritual one as well. I don't find spirituality in the like traditional sense, but just being out in the woods, being by the water with your feet in the ocean or in a stream, it's different than what our society says, like, oh, this is what's spiritual, or this is what's you should be doing to reach that higher connection. But I don't think it's as complicated as that, at least not from what I found. So some of the systems that that I've kind of found really need to change has a lot to do with our agriculture. I'm not going to say everything because I do come from a very rural background, farming communities through Idaho and Montana. I'm very familiar with farm life. But when I say like our agriculture system, I'm thinking of like the big, big like monocropping farms, but the ones that are more owned by the companies that create our highly processed foods. That's more where my gripe is. I have all the respect in the world for small scale farmers, quality homegrown food, and even the bigger farms that do it properly. You know, it's more has to do with the like pesticide use, GMO, those kind of companies, especially kind of like when you think of like what Monsanto has done in the past, and how they've monopolized our food systems. Like, and there's other like industries too. I'll just kind of touch on each of them, but I'll start with the kind of my what I understand of our agriculture, and because food itself is so core to our nutrition and therefore our health. And when I'm talking about plant medicine, plant nutrition, like it really is that, like it's nutrition. It's what your body needs to be able to function properly. Like whole foods have become less convenient, I guess. We still have access to them, but like you don't know where it's been grown, you don't know how well it's been grown, if it's been modified. And these things are crucial to what we do. Like, you can't be healthy if you eat the same thing every day, especially if it's highly processed. And by highly processed, we mean like a lot of like the microwavable foods, things that have been, for lack of a better word, processed. And when I say whole foods, that's like, you know, potatoes from the garden or the vegetables from the garden, and cooking them into something yourself rather than letting the company or some factory do the processing for you. And the same thing goes down to our protein, you know, where like you can have, you know, raw beef that you pick up at the store, but if that cow has been fed, like there's old videos of cows being fed stale candy after, you know, like Halloween. Like they just literally feed these cows like buckets worth of gummy worms and all this food that's not real food. So what do you think that does to the quality of the meat of the cow, you know, kind of thing? Whereas if you have like small scale farmer or your local like butchery, like a lot of those cows have been raised on grasses, on alfalfa, you know, the what's been growing out in the natural world, and that natural state of things like transcends through like the quality of the meat and therefore into you and your own health, you know. And that's where that connection is really, really, really important. And it starts a lot of times with what we eat. Back in the day, especially during like World War II, victory gardens, they called them victory gardens because it was propaganda. I mean, the government like suggested that everyone grow their own food and thus help the war effort. But when you think about it, like back then, half of everyone's food was coming from their own backyard. And people were a lot healthier. There's even a study that I found where they looked at the diets of folks in Denmark when they were under occupation. But essentially, what they were is they were landlocked. They weren't allowed to ship their goods in and out during World War II, and so a lot of the people had to rely on whole grains that they grew themselves. Cows, like the milk that they consumed was homegrown through their own livestock, and those folks, they actually had better, healthier diet than any other time in their history. And they were showing how it was a lot of just consuming raw food, whole foods, that really contributed to that. I also saw this video recently. I think I'm trying to remember his name. Jamie Oliver. He's a chef, and he did a video where he went into a classroom of kids. This was fairly recently. And he brought a whole bunch of vegetables and asked the kids, like, can you identify what these are? And a lot of the kids couldn't. They just had blank looks. They didn't know what to do. Like, and some of it might have been just, social anxiety. They're unfamiliar, but these kids were not sure how to identify a tomato. But then he asked them, like, has anyone heard of ketchup, like tomato ketchup? And they all raised their hands. So I think it shows a big gap in our knowledge and, like I said, that disconnection from our health and our nutrition in our natural world. Like, they're all interconnected. You can actually go watch that video. It's on YouTube. It's called Jamie Oliver's Food Revolution. And you can see for yourself, like, these kids are not connecting the highly processed foods with natural foods, and therefore they're not connecting natural foods with health and nutrition. And I think that's a big gaping hole in our, not really our education system, because I don't think it's the teacher's fault, but I think it's something that's passed down like family to family. Like, you should teach your kids nutrition, but if you don't know that yourself, then how could you? There's a book actually by a gentleman named Mark Bittman. It's called Animal Vegetable Junk, and he kind of gives a whole history of like our agriculture system and how we've gotten to where we are today. There's also a YouTube like documentary. It's like a little short documentary. It's only about an hour and a half long. It's called Seed, The Untold Story. And it was mind-blowing even to me, because it talks about the biodiversity that we've lost through big monocropping agriculture. They'll grow miles and miles of like one type of corn, and that one type of corn gets used in everything that we consume, like corn syrup, like tortillas, like the whole works. But there are hundreds of different types of corn, some of which we've lost completely. The seeds don't exist anymore because we haven't grown them. Um, and there's some folks that are going around the world and they're logging all these different types of seeds and like preserving them for posterity. Um, but it really gets into like how much biodiversity we've lost. And when you're talking about like biodiversity, it's really important because that includes our native wild spaces. Um, and when you hear people talk about like save the bees, like it is true that like honeybees are really, really struggling right now, especially in the United States, because they'll go for miles through these monocropped farms, and it's like eating pizza, like day in, day out, the same thing. Like your health is not going to be good after that, and neither is theirs because they're only able to consume one type of pollen or like one type of nectar, that like a lot of health comes through diverse nutrition, and we need that. The bees need that. We do too. All the animals do. And the other thing is like when people say like save the bees, like they're not thinking about native species of bees. Honeybees are not native to the United States or North America. Like solitary bees, like and bumblebees. You have mason bees, leafcutter bees. There's like 4,000 species of bees. We just always talk about honeybees because honey is a commercial product. But native pollinators are just as valuable to the health of this biodiversity that we need in both our own diets as well as native, like wild spaces. Some are, I mean, some plants can only be pollinated by certain types of pollinators. And even when it comes down to our commercial spaces, like apple orchards, like honeybees don't usually fly early in the spring, but mason bees do. And there's a company in Washington called Crown Bees. They're helping people raise mason bees and leafcutter bees, and they're helping a lot of these like Washington orchards because they won't get pollinated otherwise. And they're native species. Like we need our wild animals, our pollinators, our insects, everything, in order to have a healthy ecosystem. They're all parts of a whole. And that's kind of where that, for me, that spirituality comes in of like every single one of us and every little insect and every plant is part of a greater whole. And it's that whole that makes up the beautiful world we live in. So respecting and learning about each of these little parts and pieces, like, it's so valuable. Like, and it's pivotal to our survival, or like in our being able to not only survive in the wild but to thrive. And both native bees and honeybees are being killed by the heavy pesticide use that our agriculture system is using, and it's a lot of like combination of factors that are killing them, where it's like the pesticides might not kill them outright, but it makes them so sick that they can't find their way home or they can't find their way to food. And when they can only find one type of food, like their health just declines. So it kind of makes you think about like what's happening to our own health. Without those native pollinators, like we lose so much. Like we lose the health of our wild spaces, and it's all interconnected, There is a book actually by Paige Embry, called Our Native Bees. And that was kind of what really woke me up to understanding that, honeybees are not all there is. And when we say save the bees, like, we should be thinking about our native bees first. And bees aren't the only pollinators either. Like, there's hummingbirds, there's bats, a lot of beetles like pollinate, and moths are some of our most valuable nighttime pollinators. And it just goes on and on and on. There's a couple different organizations. There's the Pollinator Partnership that you can look up online, and they talk about, all the different pollinators that we need and their health and worldwide, because all these native pollinators are vital to like our forest health. And our forest system is another thing that I grew up in logging areas where it's not uncommon to see big clear cuts of trees cut down for the sake of lumber and paper, and there's so many mills that process these into goods, and there is forest land that they've set aside for, as essentially a crop, but when you're talking about forest health, it's kind of like the monocropping. Like, they go in, they clear cut, and then they plant a whole bunch of trees, all the same age, all the same size as they grow up, and you can tell the difference between a forest that's been left wild and a forest that's been managed. And they're doing a lot of research on those managed forests and what kind of ecosystem health there is there too. And they're finding it's nothing compared to like old growth forest. Excuse me. And trees are the lungs of our world, like, and if you want to talk about interconnectedness, like, just think of the roots of trees. There's a gentleman in Germany, actually, his name's Peter Wohleben. He wrote a couple books, really good books. One of them is called The Hidden Life of Trees. And he is growing an old growth forest. He bought land in Germany and he's turning it into old growth forest by letting it pretty much manage itself, but at the same time, like, having a care for, what's growing there, removing the invasive species, paying attention to what is in it and the types of life, plant life, fungi, as well as the trees themselves. And some of his findings are just fascinating to me because he talks about, it wasn't his discovery, but he talks about what they are calling the like wood wide web. And what they're understanding is that, like, fungi, the little mycelium of their, I want to say roots, but they're not really roots. They do go down into the dirt. They're little, like, fibers. The mycelium of these fungi that grow wild in the forest are actually connecting the ends of tree roots to each other. So the end of one tree root will connect to the fungi, and then the fungi will connect them to the end of another tree root over here. And they're talking about like signals and like energy pulses that go through the trees and the fungi and kind of connect the whole thing, let alone all the herbs and everything together too. And I highly recommend reading all his works because it's just fascinating. Another kind of just spiritual like connection of things and how we all live in this web of, there's not a hierarchy here. Like, people aren't at the top of like the apex of things, but like we're part of a whole and a greater whole. And trees themselves are elders. They're the oldest life we have, to learn from. And there's so much to learn. And like, my husband's tribe, like they talk about, you know, the trees having souls, like trees having a sense of being and medicine in and of themselves. And here now we're having all these like scientific studies like kind of reveal that like trees do speak, trees do talk, like even fungi do. Like there's pulses of energy through everything. And the further we get away from that, the more we're feeling disconnected, and like society is the only thing that matters when it's not. Society isn't the end all be all, like, but it came from connection of people with the earth and people relying on people to survive, you know, in hostile world, you know, back prehistoric, you know, like we need these connections of things, and society is something that stems from community, but community itself is, I feel, very different from society. And like it's cultural, like we all come from a culture that has been at some point or other reliant on the earth and each other and the plants around us. Like we're all earth-based society and communities, you know, I feel like is a better word. And getting back to that connection like really helps us like ground ourselves again, you know. I feel like in that kind of ancestral wisdom like that society separates us from. Like if you want to talk about like praying to your ancestors, like go sit in the middle of the woods, like sit with your feet in the water of a cold creek. Like there's a whole other level of being, you know, present, I guess, is kind of where my mind wants to take it. You know, it's like anchoring you into presence, you know, and being in a moment and in a time. And like those moments are what make up all of the past. And I think awakens that kind of like deeper connection to things and to what's around us. So I'm gonna actually check my notes real fast to see if I'm on track. And I think, well, I think too, the more we like do that for ourselves and can like communicate to other people or meet other people who are doing that already, like that's when you get the original like community sense, like connection, like not just to the world but to each other, and to health and that mind, body, and soul sense of being like whole, like, and having that foundation of health in your life. Oh yeah, there's a sorry, there's another book. You'll hear me recommend books a lot because I'm a big reader and always have been, but this one has been talked about a lot already. But Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. She talks about her tribal and indigenous First Nations connection to plants and life and earth and caring for spaces, and it's moving. Like I'm not ashamed to admit that I read that book 3 times back to back. I like finished it, closed the bottom back cover, and then like opened the first page again and read it again because she's so right. And a lot of what I said, she's eloquent, absolutely eloquent, and she puts it in such a way that's like, even for folks who are not First Nations, like you understand like where we need to be and like where we all have been at some point or other, like no matter how far removed we are from our traditional culture, say that with like a grain of salt, because like people come from so many backgrounds. Um, but there's things you connect with, like, you know, it's like finding a new interest and being like, oh, like this is meant for me, like this is what I do. And as an artist, like I'm not unfamiliar with that, where it's like, you know, I love doing this, I was meant to do this, you know, and it's part of your being. But like we still feel that with so many like cultural connections. Like I don't think there's a big coincidence that a lot of like Caucasian Americans are finding that connection to their ancestral histories, like recently, not just because of the show Vikings, but you know, there's an interest there because these, I mean, that was our earth-based tradition, you know, and there was that kind of medicine and magic, like, and you could use those words interchangeably. But I highly, highly recommend reading Robin Kimmerer's book. Again, it's called Braiding Sweetgrass. Just phenomenal. um, and then when it comes back all the way back around to herbs, you know, for me anyway, like between our agriculture, our forest health, our pollinator health, and then herb health, and when I say that, I mean like, you know, preserving our biodiversity in our wild spaces as well as our food systems. Like when you're walking through the woods, like at least before, like I mentioned previously, um, you know, like green space is nice. Like that's a fern, like, you know, that's a cool wildflower. But like once you start learning like the differences between everything and being able to name them and see them as friends, like to be able to greet, you know, a cedar tree as like, you know, for what it is, and to recognize its beauty and its like usefulness, like there's a whole other level of connection, you know. And even invasive herbs are useful. Plantain, like I mentioned, dandelion, but then our native ones as well, like I said, uva ursi and usnea, nettle, stinging nettle, which, you know, some folks are like, oh, I'm trying to get that out of my yard, you know, I'll treat it with, you know, like herbicides, you know, like try to get rid of it. But the same as with like the dandelions, but they see it as something hostile because it causes pain, but they don't even understand how useful nettle can be and how valuable. Like it's one of our, I think, one of our most valuable herbs, just because of how much it can give us. Certainly one of my favorites. Um, and I can get into why later on. I think what I'll do is kind of break up multiple videos of like showing different herbs and talking about each one of them specifically, um, because it's worth knowing. Um, Certainly since I've started recognizing herbs, reading about herbs, and it's not hard to do. Like I have a book that's called Northwest Medicinal Plants by Scott Kloos, and there's so much in that book. Like that's like I'm still learning every day, um, and it's fun to go out on a hike and recognize new plants, new friends, new allies, um, and be able to greet them as like I know you, and in a way they know us too, you know. But to be able to return that kind of recognition is connects us, um and like just being curious, like so like wanting to learn more and having an interest in the natural world and being able to greet a trip into the woods like an adventure. Like those are all things that like I was saying before, like expands your mental state and um roots you into that connected network. Um but also gives you the knowledge to kind of take control of your own health in a way where it's like, sometimes these plants show up for a reason in your life. And they're showing themselves to you, waiting for you to recognize them. And I found that with a multitude of plants, and my health has been so much better for it. Like, I don't have the same kind of mental states as I did before. And there's a forward momentum and an interest in wanting to, do things to help our native and wild spaces. I'd love to have land that, I can just let nature be nature and kind of coexist with it. Like, herbalism isn't as like dangerous as like society wants us to believe, where it's all these like, oh, all it takes is one bad mushroom and like you're dead, or like, like you better know what each of those plants are, and like be able to properly identify them. Like, it's easier than you'd think. And if you're scared about that kind of thing, like, either like purchase from people who are trustworthy to identify those things, or like get like 3 different reference guides and like cross-reference it. Like, you're not incapable of being able to recognize these things. And like, I don't think it's a coincidence that society wants us to believe that herbalism is dangerous or scary for that reason. I think that's one of my other gripes with our society, is the way they try to create patients, create repeat customers. They want to make us reliant. They want us to believe that we can't exist without our, like, because I'm not trying to point fingers either. Like, it's a little difficult sometimes to choose my words because I want to be careful about it. But like, my mom's been a nurse for over 25 years. Like, and there's been times where, like, yeah, I've needed our societal, like, medicinal system. And I think everybody does, like, especially people with, like, severe chronic conditions. Like, you do need that kind of thing. But, like, for instance, when you learn that doctors themselves are not trained in herbalism, they don't know what the difference between these plants are. They're just as plant blind as everybody else. It makes it so that the first suggestion is pills or like treatment, or whereas like I feel like they're skipping a step where our hospital and medicinal system should exist as the next step for what plants and herbals can't do for us, whereas like obviously like someone with diabetes needs insulin, but at the same time, like, if you take Devil's Club, like, that has potential to regulate your blood sugar, like, and if you're doing that already, you might not need as much of the other things. Again, I'm just kind of rambling, but those are kind of my thoughts, where it's like, our healthcare system exists, for when things are too serious for us to be able to control. But at the same time, no one's going to control your nutrition and your core health, your foundational health, like, for you. Like, a doctor can't do that for you. They're not living your life for you. So it's like your responsibility, just as I learned that it's mine, to be able to make sure we're eating properly, make sure we're having a care for our mental state. And supplementing our nutrition, though, in every way we know how, with organics and good food, as well as plant medicine, like plant-based or fungi. Like, there's different things, but like there's so much more we can do on our own than someone else can do for us, and that's kind of why I'm here to like teach, I guess, in whatever limited fashion I know, because I don't know it all. I just want people to know that they can do this for themselves, and I'm not the only one in my life who's done it. Like, I know people who've done this themselves and then they taught me, and vice versa, and like we're all part of this web of knowledge as well as community, and it's well worth it. I don't really know how to kind of end these videos. You're kind of just gonna see me ramble until I run out of things to ramble about, and I think I'm about there for now. But you can find me on Instagram. My herbalism business is called Wild Blood Herbs, helping people thrive in the wild. You can find me on Instagram. I have a website. It's wildbloodherbs.bigcartel.com. I'll put on all the links down below, and I have a Patreon that we're saving up to buy our land and hopefully create a space where nature can exist the way it should be, in coexistence with us, fulfilling our health and lives and everything. So I appreciate everyone who's here, who has some sort of interest. Like I said before, I'm not a YouTuber by any means. I'm just kind of going to show up and ramble and talk about things, and just be a human, because there's nothing else I am. Can't be anything else. But for real, it's just good to know that there's options out there, that you are in more control than you think you are, and that you have a better connection to this world, and it's not to our society, but like you can achieve that deeper connection to our natural spaces and feel what it does for you, and it's worth it. It's so worth it. But anyway, I'm gonna go ahead and get off before this gets too long. I'm gonna try and keep these at a decent, manageable length, kind of like little podcasts, I guess. But I hope some of the things I say can help people. Like I said, I'm just kind of here for sharing what I do know. I'm learning always, so I'm sure there'll be videos where I'm just like, I just learned a thing, let me share it with you. And we'll just, I guess, see where it goes from here. So I appreciate you all joining me for the ride, and I can't wait to see what the next video is going to be. Alright, have a good one, everyone.